Hey everyone, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to take a look at the approaching Venus-Mars square that is coming through this week on the heels of a very busy and dynamic full moon, which we explored yesterday. The lovers are getting together in the Mars-based tension of a square. So this does favor a kind of Marsy Venus-Mars interaction, if that makes sense. But we're going to unpack that today and tell you what to watch for and really get to know some of the more tense interactions between Venus and Mars in general, because there is an opportunity to do that right now. And that's a good thing to spend time talking about because we don't get the really tense interactions between these two planets all that often. So it's nice to dive into it a little bit more intentionally. All right, before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. We are getting closer to 68,000 subscribers on the channel. Thank you very much to everyone who has doubled our monthly subscription average. We really appreciate it. We are trying to get to 70,000 by the autumn equinox. We'll see if we can get there or not. But if you listen regularly and you're not yet subscribed, we do appreciate it. It helps the channel grow. It helps our business grow. It helps everything we do to grow just a little bit more. So thank you to everyone who's already done so. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on the website, which is nightlightastrology.com. And when you go over there, we have a sale running and a couple of things happening this week. A sale on the new Astrology Essentials course. This is an 8-module pre-recorded course that you can take and watch at your own pace. This is for people who are absolutely brand new. So we have a first-year course, a second-year course, a third-year course, a horary course. Those programs are all set for people who are beginners, but sometimes people come into our first year course and find that they wish they had even just the most basic or essential things that we kind of assume people already have if they're into astrology to the point of taking a class. So we made this like, this is like, what are those books called? Astrology for Idiots or whatever? That sounds really harsh. That's not, sorry. You get what I mean? This is like the beginning. If you are brand new and you want some place to start, we are going to teach you about what astrology is, how it works, planet signs and houses, aspects and dignities, timing techniques, horoscopes. We're going to talk about how to identify what kind of astrology you are listening to when you listen to content creators out there. We're going to talk about the best ways to learn astrology going forward from the course. And this will prepare you for our year 1 class if you are thinking about taking it this fall or next spring. We offer it twice a year. So anyway, at the bottom, you'll find the early bird payment. It saves you $50 off the course, which will be normal price will start on September 15th after this pre-registration sale. The course will be released in mid-September, so you'll be able to pre-order it now and watch then. All right. Well, if you go to events on live talks, you'll see this Thursday night, I'm also giving a talk on the 8th house called The Place of Karmic Debts. This is going to be a really informative talk for people who want to understand a little bit more about the 8th house, maybe not feel quite so freaked out by it as well. So check that out. That's coming up this Thursday night, 7 to 9 p.m. When you register, you'll get the webinar link. And if you can't attend live, you get access to the recording afterward. So I hope to see some of you there. And I hope that some of you will be able to check out that new beginners class. It's ideal for people who also may have a friend or a family member, someone that is interested in astrology, that wants to learn a little bit more about the basics. This is going to give you an introductory level understanding of a lot of the core features of the language of astrology so that you can feel a little bit more competent in listening to astrological content or in going further with your studies. So on that note, let us now turn our attention to the real-time clock, where we are looking at Venus's square to Mars this week. Mars is in the superior position, meaning that Mars has a little bit of the upper hand in the dynamic, and that is also an ancient concept with right and left-handed aspects. So I've broken that down before. I'm not going to get into that today, but the bottom line is the two planets are coming through the square. This is Thursday, August 22nd into Friday, August 23rd, that the exact square takes place. But you could spread this out to about Monday, August 26th, when the two planets start to move within about 3 degrees apart by next Monday, Tuesday. So we're in the orb or the range of the effects or manifestations of you've heard me talk about this as like a bush full of berries that is blossoming. And here is the bush full of berries that is blossoming between Venus and Mars in Virgo and Gemini. Now, Venus is debilitated in Virgo, which means that there's a little bit of a tension between Mercury and Venus that is natural to those two planets, that Venus carries that tension when she travels through Virgo. And we've talked about that. If you took a look at my deep dive into Venus and Virgo last week, you learned more about that. Venus coming through the square to Mars in Gemini is one thing that's interesting is they're both in Mercury ruled signs. And of course, Mercury is retrograde and coming out of the combustion with the sun and about to turn direct as the sun also enters Virgo and then becomes it then moves into a mutual reception with Mercury. So it's an interesting time for the ruler of these two planets, Venus and Mars, in the square with each other. Mercury is undergoing a process of transformation that is about to conclude. If we take this forward just a little bit, by the end of next week, Mercury will be stationing direct. So anyhow, the square between Venus and Mars is one of the oldest archetypal combinations. In many different religious and spiritual traditions, these two archetypes are the quintessential archetypes of the masculine and feminine, the yin and the yang. And when the lovers meet in trines and sextiles, even conjunctions to a certain extent, usually the significations are they can be very harmonious. When they're in squares and oppositions, they tend to be a little bit more conflicted. Squares are of the nature of Mars. Mars is in the superior position. So we might see a little bit more of a tense interaction between the two planets this week. So I want to talk about what you can watch for with these two planets anytime they get together. I'll say a few things about the fact that they are in Gemini and Virgo, but what is really important is that we understand how Mars-Venus squares manifest, because that is the most palpable thing that you will feel or notice this week. I titled this, "The Lovers Are Always Together," and I'm alluding to a book that was written by the archetypal psychologist James Hillman, who is one of the really great, like, intellectual and spiritual influences of my career. I've read everything he's written, and he has a book that he wrote, and I've actually read from it before on the channel, called A Terrible Love of War. And the word love and war are purposely put together because the book is a real excavation of the age-old archetypal relationship between Venus and Mars, love and war, conflict and harmony. These are archetypal principles personified, obviously, in these gods. And what's most important is not that we take the side of one planet over the other, which we're prone to do because we want one of them to be better than the other. It's just very easy for most of us to say, "I'd like peace over war." It's like very common sense. But it's more complicated than that, because for ancient mystics, the entirety of manifest reality, the living cosmos, exists because of the tension of so many opposites, all different kinds of opposites, oppositional tension and duality between opposites that hold and work against one another, and also those that move fluidly across spectrums. Different kinds of opposites, different ways in which opposites move, was at the heart of what ancient philosophers were thinking about. This is across the East and the West. And despite the kind of New Age, there's kind of a New Age mantra that you'll hear about oneness and non-duality and overcoming duality and all of that kind of stuff. That also existed in the ancient world, this thought about what is non-dual or the one. However, what is much more common in ancient philosophy than I think people understand is that we wouldn't have life without duality, that we wouldn't have life without the tension and interaction and creativity that comes from opposites and their tensions. And so ancient philosophers, many of them, were not really interested in getting rid of opposites or insisting that they are all illusions, but rather learning how to live with them, live in and through them without getting torn apart by them, without getting taken on a horrifying ride by them, right? So ancient philosophers, by and large, are interested in a kind of oneness that exists in and through duality. So you have both oneness and duality as co-present divine eternal realities that are a part of life. That's really important philosophically speaking, because it gets right to the core of one of the difficulties that we have about Mars and Venus, which is that we would typically like Venus to be better than, more important than, more virtuous than Mars. We think, yeah, love, peace, harmony, like happiness, like shouldn't these things be more important than strife, a Mars ruled word, or division or conflict or cutting or severing or hostility? Well, yeah, I mean, on the surface level, most of us privilege and prefer Venusian types of experience. This is one of the reasons that Mars, within our relative world of karma, was considered a malefic. A malefic, not meaning that Mars is evil in and of itself, but meaning that Mars tends to signify the things that we don't like as much as the other things we like from Venus, who is called a benefic. We like good fortune, a nice day, sunny sky, temperate weather, day at the beach, making love, eating good food, doing nice things with friends. We love that. Not many of us really love like, oh, today it was beautiful. I got in this wonderful fight with John, whoever John is. So you get the idea. But it's really important that we do a little more work to recognize the presence of opposite archetypes in bed with each other. And Venus and Mars are the quintessential lovers in the bed of almost every image. And that's something that James Hillman said. So let me give you a taste for this. And I'm not suggesting, please don't hear me wrong in suggesting that I'm like, oh, let's go glorify war and violence. And no, it's not about that as much as it is about there's a kind of cosmic humility that is required for us to really recognize how complicated things are. That there are archetypes like Venus and Mars, and we all say, "Oh, I love Venus. And I'm not into Mars." But if we do a little digging, we'll find that Mars is everywhere Venus is because they're intertangled with each other, just like lovers. You can't really separate them. And once we recognize that, it's not that we glorify war, it's that we become less hypocritical. We become less self-righteous. We become more humble in the face of what's really going on in the universe and how complex it is. And once we can hold the tension of those opposites, we become so much more mindful. And one of the biggest blocks to any kind of spiritual growth is self-righteousness and hypocrisy. And those things, we think that in order to not be self-righteous or to not be hypocritical, that we have to be in possession of tons of virtue and all the truth. And no, we don't have to know all the truth. We don't have to be anywhere than where we are to be in a really good place for spiritual growth. Spiritual growth happens so much more quickly for people who just realize, like, I don't know, I'm kind of a mess. I do my best. There's some good things about me. There's a lot of things I don't know. And I'm not going to stand on any platform of like righteousness because I would be the world's quickest hypocrite if I do that. One of the quickest ways to get to that kind of humble attitude in the face of the complexities of the cosmos is to understand opposites and to understand how intertwined they are with one another, because it makes it so much harder for us to judge or to marginalize or to cast out or to stand in some kind of righteous opposition to part of reality, which is part of us, right? So anyhow, my long-winded sermon over here, let's get into it. Here's the ways in which you can see the lovers together in their conflicts, in their tensions. How about makeup sex? Let's start with a juicy one. I mean, let me put it this way. I think that I'm just observing human experience from the standpoint of doing so many readings over the years and listening to people from where they're coming from in their life and looking at my own life. There is something about conflict within relationships, tension within relationships, which we broadly can describe as Venus Mars, relationship and conflict. And the two are very important for the sake of passion and the sake of chemistry and the sake of connection and attraction. Now, obviously, there are going to be examples where there's no place for violence in a relationship or suppression or oppression or what have you. And there's examples where obviously like relationships need to end and people need to advocate for themselves. But you see, even in advocating for yourself in a relationship where maybe someone is being abusive, that the development and cultivation of the right kind of relationship in your life will have grown out of fighting for yourself, for your own dignity. And the point is not that glorifies and justifies violence. It's that it gives a place for Mars in the reality of life. that there's a dark Mars that comes at you in a relationship, and you have to advocate for yourself, stand up for yourself, protect yourself, leave, sever, cut the cord. Okay. And then hopefully your next relationship is more harmonious. But you will not be, if you're honest with yourself, you will not be able to separate the beautiful, harmonious relationship you reached and the fighting for your own dignity that you had to do. Right. And so life works like this. Life teaches us, life grows us through these tensions of opposites. The other thing is that let's just say, and I'm like, I mentioned makeup sex and I haven't come back to it, but like, how many times is there tension in a relationship that two people really love each other? They're in a good relationship, no abuse going on. It's just, it's just your run of the mill conflict. And that conflict will often be intimately involved with the dynamism and attraction of two people. That there will come a point where the tension will break into a smile and two people will come toward each other and then have very passionate lovemaking that is rooted in conflict. Everybody knows what that's like. And I'm not saying that it's always healthy. There's clearly going to be examples where it's not. But my point is to just draw those two opposites, Mars and Venus, together. Because the more we do that and the more we're capable of seeing that in creation at large, the harder it is to stand in judgment of anyone or anything. Because we realize that conflict and flow, tension and harmony, that they work in and out of each other and they are part of how life flows along. And if we have more understanding and less judgment of that process, we are going to be in a much better space for growth. We're going to have an appreciating capacity for life rather than constant polarization. We think sometimes that we get rid of duality by going to some space of oneness. That's not it. We get to a space of oneness by appreciating and understanding the contours of duality and how they move within the scope of oneness, like the black and white within the larger circle. Anyhow, so makeup sex is a good example. 2, victory is attractive. Okay, like let's just be real. We want our teams to win. And we are so like, I think of it in sports, right? When a team wins a championship, they have a parade. And there's like, the floats moving down the street and streamers and confetti and it's beautiful and they're dressed up and like victory is something like I think about I think it was the 6 of Wands in the tarot. It shows a guy like riding on a horse and he's got like a wreath around his head. And he's riding high. The thing is that whether it's something we care about politically or socially or in sports or in our personal lives or whatever it is, we find victory and achievement and overcoming of difficulties very attractive. We find it beautiful, even though I know that sounds weird. One of the reasons that, like, for example, one of the things that I love about bodybuilding as a hobby right now in my life and weight training and so forth is that the results are beautiful. Like, I love how I feel. I love how my body feels. I love that my body looks better because I'm doing difficult things. And the difficult things like the training, the cardio, the sleeping, the diet, like it's a lot. Those are challenges, right? And it's like, whew, this is challenging. But then the results are so attractive. And the same thing goes for why we love the Olympics. We love seeing the people at the end holding beautiful, being adorned like Venus with jewelry, with metal, gold. And they're standing up on a platform and the flag is waving and the music is playing. It's very Venusian. And we're attracted to victory. And I don't think that is like a damning, I don't think that like anyone should feel, condemned by that. We should feel liberated by that, because if we can admit to ourselves, yeah, I like to see my team win, because I'm attracted to the beauty of victory. Well, it's a little harder to be a hypocrite and it's a little easier to be humble the more aware of that we are, right? And because then we can say, okay, when is that tension appropriate, and when is it feeding into an unhealthy form of domination or an unhealthy form of, like egoic victory and the support and development of hierarchies that crush people? Do you know what I mean? So, but you can't get there by pretending that you don't have a very basic archetypal level of attraction to victory. So Venus and Mars, when they come together, they often bring up the tension between what we desire and the difficulty of getting there, of the tensions and hardships required to win, or they bring up tensions in relationships between who's more attractive or valuable and who should be, who's ahead of the other person. And we think to ourselves always, when Venus and Mars come together in a conflict, we think, well, I'm on the right side of this, because it's easy to justify our stake in any matter. And it's easier to imagine that someone else is being selfishly attracted to some vain glory, or, so the other person is the one who's attracted to something selfish. I think it's really healthy to have Venus Mars moments like these. They come up and you just admit to yourself what outcome you find to be both powerful and attractive, and just be honest about it. Honesty is one of the main qualities necessary for growth. Honesty with ourselves, especially. We can be honest with ourselves. It is harder to be a hypocrite, and it's harder to be self-righteous. And that's our mantra for this talk today, is like, if the more aware we are of archetypal tensions, the harder it is to be self-righteous, the harder it is to be a hypocrite. And that's a good place to be in, because it's so much easier to appreciate, to stay curious, and grow when we're in that space. Number 3, relationships are often formed and deepened based on what we fight for, right? So think, for example, about the groups you belong to politically, socially, culturally, that care for the same fights and battles that you do ideologically, or philosophically, or religiously, or whatever the case might be. This is a basic Mars-Venus tension, that many relationships in our lives are based on what we take a stand for, or what we fight for, what we advocate for, or what victories or battles we're in the midst of, and who we see as, that person that's on my team. Now, is it bad? No, not at all. It's normal. It's natural. However, I think, again, it can keep us humble if we stay aware of it. Because if we point the finger at other human beings and say, oh, you're, it's these people over here who all have some kind of mob mentality, trying to fight and dominate other people based on what they desire, what outcome they wish for humanity, or whatever. It's like, yeah, well, most of us do that, and that doesn't mean that anything and everything is the right cause, or the best or right outcome. But it does mean that the human impulse to join with other people based on what you want to fight for, is pretty normal. And so if we can understand that, we can also understand that it's easy to be led by archetypal impulses. And that can give us a lot of compassion and patience for other people, rather than, again, self-righteousness. Different vices, same desires. I want to give you a classic example of a Neptune to Venus transit versus a Neptune to Mars transit. These come from my client practice. Different vices, same desire. We saw a client in my practice who had a Neptune transiting natal Mars. And this person went through a period of time where they became addicted to sports gambling. Okay, so, and what they wanted behind this was money and success. And they liked the thrill of getting a sweat on a game with something on the line. So it's adrenaline and a thrill and the joy of victory, and then like wealth and success and addiction. On the other hand, I'm thinking of another client that I had, Neptune transiting natal Venus, and she got herself into an enormous amount of credit card debt, overspending and going and getting clothing and jewelry and purses and things that were way outside of her means. Neptune transiting Venus, what did she want? She wanted beauty and luxury and wealth, and the enjoyment of these kind of Venusian things. But behind Venus and Mars, in either case, and a Neptune transit to both, right, was getting lost in the desire. And the desire might look a little different from a purse to gaining money through a sports bet. But both of them went into great debt. Both of them had an addiction. And one addiction looked like Venus, the other looked like Mars. Okay. But fundamentally, Venus and Mars can entangle us in very similar vices, in very similar desires, even though it's easy for us to sit back and judge the two as very different and typically to exalt Venus over Mars. And not that I don't agree, most of the time I prefer Venus to Mars as well, but you get the idea. Venus and Mars, when they come together, can also point to the fact that Venus can be hypocritical and Mars can be hypocritical. And they can look more like each other than they think they do. So just keep that in mind. 5, and I just want to close with this. Understanding opposites. There is no more fundamental opposite in ancient astrology than Venus and Mars. Maybe the sun and the moon. But harmony and strife are at the core of life in this cosmos. That there should be great tension and releases of destructive power in the actual forging of stars and planets is as important as the fact that when you look at the earth from space and you see this beautiful glowing ball of life, there's a way in which that looks like Venus. It looks like life flowing along in some holistic sense of things. Comet striking the earth, devastating. That Marsy piece is just as real as Venus. And it's so important that we move beyond what is good and bad, because that's one part of our experience, to what is real. Because the more we're able to just accept what is real, what is a part of life and how it moves along and how these tensions of opposites work, the harder it is for us to stand in judgment of ourselves, of each other, of life itself. There is tremendous freedom in that. And for most of us, growth starts in that space and in learning how to stay in that space, because that space is fundamentally appreciative and curious rather than conclusive and certain and judgmental. So anyhow, we'll leave it there for today. I hope that this was a useful meditation for everybody and gives you something good to meditate on as the lovers get together this week. As Hillman said, they are always together in the bed of images. And I love that. If you dig a little bit, you will always find this Venus-Mars tension at play in most things in life. So, yeah. By the way, I've got my tie-dye on for you today. This is especially for all of you. And I also do not identify as a tie-dye wearing human. All right. I hope you guys are having a good one. Bye.